Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Let's implement the product view model test to check if our view model is working correctly. Now under presentation, we have created this particular folder. Add another folder, let's call it screen. We need to provide the instance of the view model to test, and we have some dependencies to provide as well, the use cases and the memory database. And because we are dealing with publishers, we need to create constables. Let's override the function setup with error, the memory database, the API service and the repository, and finally the use cases. For the first function to test is for getProduct. The getProduct should return success with list of product previews. I'm going to annotate this test function with main actor. Let's arrange by assigning the view model. And because we are dealing with publishers, let's add here the expectation. I'm going to trigger the event getProduct. Now we have to observe the state by doing view model. And basically we have to drop the first emission and to call sync and store in cancellables. And as usual, we're going to wait for the expectation as we have done in the repository implementation test. I'm going to copy this section. All right. Right now we have triggered the event. We need to make sure that we have the list of products. And basically we need to find the condition where the expectation is fulfilled. In our case, the last emission, which is the page is not loading. In other words, the page is ready and the list of products is not empty. This is basically the condition. We're going to fulfill the expectation. Here we have to assert because right now we have met the expectation. We need to make sure that we have the right outcome. First of all, we need to make sure that the products is not empty. And we need to make sure that the list of products under the state matches the products from the mock data. And again, the view model should not care where the source of data comes from. Most importantly is that we have the same data from the source as the state. I'm gonna fold this section. If you do remember, under the implementation of the view model, we can have an error. Therefore, I'm gonna store the error under error. If we have an error, we're going to fail the test and we're going to fulfill the expectation. That's all we have for this test. Let's run the test. Under this tab, click on Show the Test Navigator. And we have the View Model test. Run the test. And the test succeeded. The next case, the event load product should return the correct product detail. Let's annotate it with the main actor. As usual, we're going to arrange and make sure that we have a view model to test with. And I would like to arrange the correct product detail from the mock data. And let's set the expectation, and we have to act by calling view model on event and load product. As an argument, correct product detail and ID. We are not interested in the first emission. Store in cancellables, and I'm going to copy this to wait for the expectations. The condition here to fulfill the expectation is basically the page should be ready and the product is not null. In this case, we're going to fulfill the expectation and we have to make our assertion. We're going to make sure that the product is not null. Next, we're going to make sure that the product from the state is the same as the product from the API call or the source of data. We don't care actually where the data comes from. Most importantly is we have the same data as the source of data. I'm gonna fold this section. And in case if we have an error, as usual, we're going to fail the test and to fulfill the expectation. I'm gonna delete this just to have the complete error message. All right, I think that we are done with this test. Let's refresh the list to run the test. And the test succeeded. Another obvious test for search suggestions should give us suggested products. And I'm going to arrange the search query. I'm going to store the observed state under an array and the observed search queries because the search query is going to change over time. Next, I would like to observe the changes of the search query. We have done this basically differently under the Kotlin version, but for Swift, it is similar, but it is a little bit tricky. To observe the changes, we have just to do view model and state, drop first and sync and store under cancellables. We're going to append the observed state to the observed search queries by doing observed search query and append new query. To check and to make our assertions, here should be search query instead of state. When the expectation is fulfilled, we're going to make our assertion to check if we have the related changes stored under observed search queries and to make our assertions. Now we have to observe the state changes by doing view model and state drop first, sync, and store under cancelable. Inside sync function, we have to store the observed state by doing observed state and append new element, which is state. Basically, to fulfill the expectation, first of all, the state is searching should be false, and the suggested products state should be not empty. For the first assertion that we have to do here, we need to make sure that we have the same suggested products from the source of data, in our case, the mock data. Suggested products, and we have to pass here the query, and we have to map everything to products preview. I'm gonna fold this section. In case we have an error, we need to fail the test. Keep in mind, we are not triggering anything yet. We are not even acting. We need to act basically by doing view model and search query. We need to change the search query to the query. Now we have an update. Next, we're going to basically do on event and trigger the event search suggestions. Let's wait for the fulfillment of the expectation. Underneath, we're going to run our assertion. I'm going to add here just an optional assertion for the observed search query that has the value s should match the observed search queries. Next, we need to make sure that the observed state has two values by doing count. And those two values actually are the loading state and the success state or the error state. We don't have turbine. The loading state, which is the first emission, and for the success state, it is the second emission. Could be the error state or success state, but we are expecting the success state. For the assertion, we need to make sure that the loading state is searching is true. We need to make sure that the suggested products is empty under the loading state. Now for the assertion, when it comes to success state, we need to make sure that under success state is searching is false. And under success state, the suggested products is not empty. And there is no need actually to add another assertion to make sure that we have the same list from the mock data, because under the fulfillment of the expectation we have asserted here before fulfilling the expectation, we have asserted that we have the same list from the mock data. And that's pretty much it for this test. Finger crossed, let's go ahead and run the test. And the test succeeded. With the same principle going to test the search products events, we need to make sure that search products should give us non-empty products matching the search query. We're going to observe the search query and to store the observed search queries under this array. And we have to observe the changes of the state. To fulfill the expectation, page loading false and the products is not empty. And we need to make the first assertion, basically the products under the state, product state should match the mock data search pagination response. I'm gonna fold this section, and we're not expecting any errors here. If we have an error, we're going to fail the test and fulfill the expectation. As we have done earlier, we need to act basically by changing the value of search query and trigger the event search products. Next, I'm going to wait for the expectation to be fulfilled. We have a warning here, add the observed states. Let's store the observed state here. And as usual, going to make sure that we have the correct search query. And we have two states, loading state and success state. Under the loading state, the page loading should be true and the list of products should be empty. Under the success state, page loading should be false and products is not empty. Let's go ahead and run the test. And the test succeeded. One last test to implement here is we need to make sure that search products should give us empty product lists when passing non-existent product title. The only difference here is we have to provide the query as some random title that does not exist in the database. The first assertion that we have to do here is we need to make sure that the products is empty and we are not expecting any errors. Therefore, if we have an error, we're going to fail the test. After failing the test, we need to fulfill the expectation. We have to act basically by changing the query and triggering the event search products. Next, we're going to wait for the expectations to be fulfilled. The assertion here is basically we need to make sure that we have the correct query and we have two states, the loading state and the success state. For the loading state, we have an empty product list and the page is loading. For the success state, the page is not loading and the products list is empty. We need to make sure that, first of all, before doing this, assert true. The observed states and count should be 2. Let's go ahead and run the test. And the test succeeded. In my opinion, we have to add this before doing any tests because at least 2 elements, we're going to run the test. So in order to make sure that 100% we have the loading state and success states, we need to do this assertion, which is mandatory in my opinion. Let's add it to all the test cases. All right, let's try to run all tests at once to see if there is any interference. And all tests succeeded. You're gonna ask me a question here, why we initialize the view model under tests, why we don't do it under the setup function. If you try to add the main actor, it's gonna give you an error. This is not a good idea. Therefore, you cannot initialize the view model under the setup with error. That's why we have added the main actor to initialize the view model under the tests. That's gonna wrap up our today's video, and we are done basically with the product feature. For the next video, going to implement a new feature, which is authentication feature. I hope you have learned something new. See you in the next one, and happy coding.